Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for coming out on so far the coldest night of 2025. We were very stressed that no one was going to come, and we'll just be sat here waiting for the Man United game. Man United Spurs, just for the Spurs supporters in the crowd, if there are any. My name is Tasneem. I am from SWAP, the Society Work in Politics Institute. And I realize now that I didn't actually print out Tara and Niren's biographies, so I'm going to freestyle them right now.
You kind of know us, though. Come on.
I do, but does everyone in the crowd know you? So Niren is the author of the book we're celebrating today, Writing Around the Wicket. He's been on a whirlwind tour with the book, as I'm sure anyone who follows him on social media has seen. It's been quite something of a tour. Niren is also a SWAP research associate at the moment. And we will maybe talk a little bit about the other books he's working on towards the end.
The ones that I haven't completed.
Yeah, those ones. But at least tonight we have a completed book. And Niren, of course, is an award-winning journalist and all of those lovely things. So I hope my freestyle of him was okay. Tara Weinberg is here at Wits, is a senior lecturer. Tara? Lecturer in the history department, and has done really exciting work and research on land dispossession, and also is a cricket player, most importantly. And thanks to her members of her team who are here tonight to join us. We really love that there are actual cricketers with us. So yeah, that's us on the panel. The panel, whatever that is. So yeah, let's dive into it. And it's a small crowd, so we'll try and keep it as informal as possible and hope for lots of conversation rather than one-way talking. Yeah. Okay, so I thought I'd open up. Oh, and my role here tonight, just to clarify for everyone, is I would see it best as a player-coach role. So I'm a participant facilitator. So I'll be doing both those things. So don't be surprised if I take a lot of liberty with my facilitation role and actually just add my 2 cents quite a bit. So,
and Taz has also played cricket.
A long time ago. Cool. So opening up, this morning I logged onto Instagram, and the Proteas women's cricket team Instagram page posted this video from their recent tour, the Tri-Nations series, and the tour was in Sri Lanka. They only won one of their 4 matches, but nonetheless they put up this really beautiful video which started with "Cricket is art," and I thought that would be a great place to start tonight. It struck me just because in the caption they said a whole lot of things, and then when it comes to women's cricket is art, you know, and I thought that was like a really powerful way to open this, because some of what we wanted to speak about today was this book is really about cricket in South Africa, race, class, history, politics, and we wanted to decenter some of that and center questions of gender in the opening of this conversation. So I thought that would be a nice way to kind of use what I think is a political claim that cricket is art to open the conversation with the two of you. Your turn.
Oh, that's interesting because it's an echo. Actually, it's an echo of C.L.R. James, who is a Trinidadian Marxist who has written about the Haitian Revolution. But he's also written a book about cricket, which is kind of considered one of the best sports books ever written. And he makes the assertion, he asks the question, what is art? In one of these essays. It's a collection of essays and it's part memoir, etc., Beyond the Boundary. And he, and in questioning what is art, he kind of he comes back to the idea that that cricket and sport has a similar role in society as performance art, as theater, and he uses the Greeks and the Greeks' kind of approach to a holistic human of both the intellect and the arts and what's the other one? And sports, sorry. Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm not sure if CSA are kind of aware of that, but I mean, it is an interesting kind of like return to the Jamesian argument of cricket being more than just a sport and something that resembles, that speaks to a variety of things.
Tara, just go for it. Don't wait for me.
Yeah, I think that's also interesting because I think there's another portion of CLR James that you quote in this book, Niren, which is to do with how I think CLR James, amongst some of his Marxist colleagues, was told sport is like, sport's a distraction for the masses. It's a distraction for the working classes so that they don't get involved in changing their circumstances. They're just glued to the Man United game or whatever. Mm-hmm. And CLR James said, or what you quote or paraphrase him or something along the lines of that never quite resonated.
With my past, I simply could not accept that.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah. There we go. So cultural expressions in which sport is included are ways of expressing a certain kind of politics and sometimes a certain kind of activism, which one of the things that Niren weaves through beautifully in the sections of this book is the way in which, for instance, in places like the West Indies, in the Caribbean and in Sri Lanka, cricketers and the people who watch cricket indigenize the game and also used it as a way to speak back to empire, to speak back to the British Empire, to beat them at their own game. The West Indies bowlers, the kind of four horsemen of the apocalypse who would drive terror into the hearts of batsmen. So satisfying to watch and nicely documented in the documentary Fire in Babylon that I keep saying to my cricket team, we need to watch as inspiration as well.
Yeah, you have to watch it.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of my favorite scenes from that film is actually when Andy Roberts, who's one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, his nickname was the Hitman, and he's like, yeah, I didn't intend to hit anybody, but people got hit. And but yeah, I mean, and James, that idea of with my past, I simply could not accept that. It goes to I suppose the heart of that paradox of cricket. It's a sport which requires discipline, line, conservatism almost, where at the same time this indigenization, speaking back to the empire, and James kind of he draws this from his own experience, and it comes down to this. So CLR James was precocious, and there's this interview with him, and he's an wizened old man, white-haired, and he's kind of in this interview, he's like, I'm forcibly reminded by this interview that I was a British intellectual by the age of 10. And he says this because, he'd already read Vanity Fair twice by the age of 10. And like most of us growing up, using English as our first or second language and to read, we grew up with an imaginary of England. I grew up kind of reading these weird stories about boarding school and wanting to play conkers and things like that. I didn't even know what conkers were. And there are no oak trees anywhere near where I live in KZN, right? It's subtropical. But you have this thing, and then at some point and then what happened with James is that he is a British intellectual by the age of 10, but then when he grows up and he's really good at cricket, he realizes that he has to choose a cricket club to play for, and that's where the class awareness that he recognizes from Vanity Fair becomes sharpened, because all these clubs are parts of different strata of Trinidadian society. Some clubs are only for the light-skinned Caribbean people, black people. Others are for darker-skinned black people. Others are for working class. Some are just exclusively for the whites. And as a dark-skinned middle-class Caribbean person, he's kind of trying to figure out, well, which club do I belong to? Where does my politics kind of arise from? And that's when, and then he realizes, well, with my experience, my life history, I cannot accept the cricket to be an opiate of the masses because it has sharpened my politics. I've actually got that saying tattooed on my arm. That's why I remember it.
Also, maybe to circle back to the question of gender and women's cricket and the use of that term art, is maybe to pose the question for ourselves: in what way are the stories, perhaps, or the art that women's cricket performs, what are those stories that we would tell about the South African women's cricket team? Or what does their art tell us about South Africa?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's as you guys are speaking, I'm thinking like, Niren talks about James and this movement between cricket as disciplined conservatism and then speaking back to empire, right? And that, of course, then there's all of these like cultural touchstones that speak to this idea, right? So Fire in Babylon, there's Lagan, which was a really formative kind of film for me, and of course James's work himself that do this. But I do wonder in that question and in this kind of like declaration, if we are to make this declaration, women's cricket is art, what that speaks back to, right? So that's the sort of question that it leaves me with in terms of that whole kind of conversation. To get at this a little bit more, because I think, it's a very simple question. How do you come to cricket, right? And I think that is, the book speaks to a lot of those questions. How do you come to cricket? How do we come to cricket? How do communities come to cricket? So I'm throwing that one out to either one of you or none of you. We can just pivot.
Well, I was never really good at cricket. I kind of tried to play it, but I was never very good at it. But how do we come to? We come to it through empire. We come through it through violence and trauma, and then we kind of somehow, or through projects. In South Africa, cricket was used as a civilizing instrument. It was weaponized against black communities. The idea was to kind of like make them, to include them in a project to a particular degree. Whereas in India, it's completely the opposite. It was a weapon of exclusion for a very long time. But the Indians took to it with such fanaticism. So it's very different ways of coming to the game, which for me then becomes super interesting when we're thinking about indigenization, we're thinking about identity, we're thinking about who represents us on the cricket field, and it feels like the women's cricket team have come to cricket in a variety of ways, which makes them more interesting in how they represent us, and they're more political in how they represent us, because you have queer cricket players in the women's team who are out the closet, whereas you will never find that in the male team, and they come from different classes, racial backgrounds. They don't come from these traditional schools where our men's teams come from. These institutions which have extended colonialism, which have entrenched extractive capitalism, or which have entrenched Christianity. Instead, the variety of kind of channels through which the women's team, the Proteas women's team, have come to cricket kind of suggests a representation of us as this weird, fractured country with eccentricities and idiosyncrasies and very different kind of backgrounds. It feels a lot more representative than this team where it is about the elite. You may have 3 black players in the South African men's Proteas team, but they all come with a similar mindset because they've come from these schools, as opposed to coming from different experiences.
One thing before I come to you, Tara, is that in all the like kind of clips and public interviews that I've seen of Proteas women, where they ask the question in different ways, how do you come to cricket? The line is always, well, I played with the boys, right? And this, so just throwing that one out there too.
Yeah, that's definitely how I came to cricket first up as a kid. And I think, just before I forget, I want to just make a point related to something you said, Niren, which is that because women's cricket has been marginalized for so many years, perhaps one of the byproducts of that, maybe unintended, is that women cricketers can't be part of the old boys club. No matter how much as a kid we may have played in boys teams, there comes a time where we were told, I was definitely told, you're reaching like 16, 17 now, you don't belong here anymore. I can see it's probably resonating with a lot of people. Like, there comes a time when, people are saying, well, but there are a few issues. Number one, where will you change? Number two, you might take a boy's place in the team, and that would be terrible. Like, also, people are, whether it's at the club or by their parents, like growing up girls and women are often told that. And so because they can't be part of that old boys club, they have to find other ways to play cricket and maybe express themselves in cricket. And so there's something in the margins that perhaps allows for something a little different.
Which comes back to this thing of like the periphery speaking to the center. It's like the margins are where the interesting the what's it called, the petri dish, the interesting petri dishes.
And I've thought it's funny, I hadn't before tonight thought about that a lot in relation to cricket. I thought about it actually a lot in relation to drag, because I'm a drag king and drag queens are more common. But in performing as a drag king, one of the things that we've encountered in Joburg is people are like, what is a drag king? We don't know what that is. But that also means they have no expectations. There are no drag kings on RuPaul's Drag Race or like in the media. And kind of that's kind of fun, because they don't know what to expect. So you can play with that. It gives you a little bit of power in an interesting way. And I mean, I don't want to overstate this, because women's cricket is still marginalized and there isn't as much money in it. Or to overstate it in a sense that erases the very difficult experiences of women cricketers. But maybe there is something there.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of what's problematic in the ways that publics talk about women's sport in general is this question of money and how that's like weaponized against women playing sport at elite levels. But in preparing for this, as one does, go and read every book on cricket that you can find at your disposal in 5 days. I went back to Andre Odendahl's The African Game, which I think, and Niren, of course, this is what your book does too, right? It's to bust the myth that black people don't play cricket, black communities are not involved in this game, which is something that we can swing back around to late in the conversation. But what I went back to specifically now is the references made to women in cricket, right, in that book. And drawing on those longer histories, I mean, I think that book kind of shows that women were involved in cricketing structures from 1888 or something like that. And I think really importantly, not just in playing the game, but in supporting and seeding the game in so many important ways. And then if you kind of fast forward to the SACOS organizing around sport in the anti-apartheid struggle, women's stories there are erased, but again, and I think the SACOS booklet that the history workshop here at Wits produced on women in SACOS and in non-racial sport kind of shows very clearly this, the importance of women to the structures of sport that I think goes beyond, just playing a sport, and is really about organizing. It's about development, is about community, and at the root of politics is community, right? So
I have three thoughts there. You want to go ahead, Tara, while I try and figure them out in my head?
I feel like you wanted to jump in, and every time I saw you trying to jump in, I was like, and then
no, there are a couple of things. The one thing that got me thinking really was that why do we go through these cycles of kind of, because women are playing cricket, right? And then they're not playing as much cricket because, I mean, I've got this book written by Themba Bavuma's uncle, Tengo Sokanile, which was launched last week in Cape Town. And it's quite interesting because he talks about like how the cricket teams that they had in the Western Cape in the 1930s had a women's representative team, but they don't by the 1960s and the 70s. So what's happened there? Is it attrition? Is it the demands of unwaged labor, which then become kind of like greater and greater because the men are increasingly converted into units of labor? I mean, that's an interesting thing to kind of figure out. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, do women lose some of the leisure time that they may have had in the earlier 20th century, in the 1800s or earlier 20th century? And then I wonder, I don't know enough about this, so there's just kind of something to throw out, but from what I've read about stories of women's soccer or women's football as well, that women's soccer was quite popular in the late 1800s in England, for example, and then it got defunded and phased out because of the Victorian desire to also like control women's bodies, and that this wasn't happening with increased urbanization and so on. So I wonder if this is also, I mean, the between the 30s and the 70s is also a period of tighter racial segregation controls, tighter controls around Black South Africans moving into cities, influx control, pass laws, etc. And I wonder if this is also part of that broader story.
Well, I think that's maybe a useful point to move forward the conversation in terms of the book, right? So there's two pieces in the book. One about Salem, and Salem is in the Eastern Cape, and Niren can tell you a little bit about what's in the book about this. But that's really a story about a cricket ground and land dispossession, right? And then the other one, which is, I think you pointed out earlier, quite pertinent to us because it's just around the corner, is forced removals in Fitas, and the kind of political stories that weave through the inner city and Fitas, and how cricket is really part of those stories, right? So to open us up to a kind of conversation about sport, cricket, land dispossession, and all of those sorts of things, if you could touch on those a little bit. And then Tara, who's, of course, this is her specialty.
That's her specialty, right? So, you go first or am I going first?
Maybe I can say something small and then I can segue into you talking about some of the stories in the book.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, what struck me about reading Niren's book also, which then intersected with the research that I've been doing around histories of enclosures. So basically the way in which land that was held under customary law or land held in common became enclosed by the colonial land administration system over time, with the establishment of a deeds registry that would, for example, only recognize title deeds as the only form of private property that would be sort of secure in South Africa. And then alongside that went the exclusion of Black South Africans from being able to hold title deeds, and therefore the exclusion basically of Black South Africans in terms of property rights that are recognized by the deeds registry, recognized by the courts, and so on. And so that process of legal dispossession went alongside a process of physical dispossession, of forcibly removing Black South Africans from their land, something which our colleague Dineo Scosano is here, has a brilliant new book about that as well, which I also highly recommend. So I think this point about cricket as being this colonial upper class game which sought to enclose the land that may have been previously held in common in certain ways, in which perhaps people would have also been playing on and having leisure time on, and then close that and say, oh, to be able to play here, you have to pay up and be a member of this club, or something like that. And I think your book speaks to that in very direct ways in terms of Salem, of the cricket ground literally displacing people and remaining a symbol of that. And then in Fitas, of the forced removals, like removing the possibility of people being able to have community around cricket in that particular place. So that's what I'll say.
I mean, the Salem essay actually came out of a project that I've been working with Simon, who's behind the camera there, which looks at issues of land dispossession, and it's quite interesting because one of the people that we interview is Mr. Madinda, who's passed away now, but who was in his late 80s, early 90s, I think, when we did the interview, Simon. And I mean, he remembers his father talking about how when the white man came and when the 1820 Septon Party landed in Salem, how witnessing kind of white men kind of riding all day on their horseback and then planting a flag, and then riding further and planting another flag, and then in the morning there was the fence up, and at the beginning Mr. Madinda was saying we had the land, they had nothing. By the end, they had the land, we had nothing, and they were converted into units of labor, and they became, to quote him, a button without a hole, because there was a breakage between people and the land, and to the point where they became units of labor, which mimics something that is happening already in Ireland, which is happening in England already, the enclosure movement, which then gets exacerbated to the point where you have the migrant labor system kind of emerging out of that, and it's super interesting because Salem purports to be the oldest cricket ground in the country. And contrary to what is happening in the rest of the Eastern Cape, where the Maxhosa elite were being taken to Zonneblom College to be taught Victorian morals and ethics and cricket, in Salem, the first black player that they had was in the 1980s. So it was there in Salem, it was about exclusion, and it still is about exclusion. I mean, when we were there recently, 2018, 2019, doing interviews around, because Salem, there was a big court case which allowed for large tracts of land to be restituted in that area in 2008, and some of that land now is being worked by black farmers, black female farmers, etc. And they're facing contemporary problems around access to market, security, the fact that they're not getting the similar kind of like symbiotic help that white farmers have with each other around things like security, etc. There is still that level of exclusion that exists there. Sorry, I was making a point, and I've completely forgotten that point. Oh yeah, so Boet Mem is the first black player to play for Salem in the 1980s, as opposed to what is happening in the rest of the province for much longer. And it carries on to today, because in one of the interviews that we did, I remember quite clearly, I think it was like Philip Am, or I mean, one of the direct descendants of the Septon Party, who's now in charge, the chairperson of the Salem Cricket Club, etc. He kind of talks about, well, you know what's happening now? It's very difficult to farm the land. Why? Because you need to count on your neighbors. And when the white farmers leave, you're not sure who's going to take over the land. You're not sure if their values, if they have the similar values as us. Similarly, it was very difficult and he talked about playing cricket, and you all day in the field with somebody, and you want to have, and when you're chatting to them between overs and whatever, you want to have similarities. You want to have something to talk about. He's essentially saying you want white people around you all the time, and this is in 2018. So that exclusion, which has existed in the 1800s, exists until today. That need to kind of like make labor, to make units of labor out of the black population, to exclude them from the land, to enclose the land, continues, and to kind of also deprive them of access to the graves, which is also something which Dineo's book deals with, but which is also very apparent in Salem, because some of the farmlands which have not been given back to the communities hold these graves, and that link, that spiritual link with the ancestors is broken, and that is a deep violence.
So, Tara, just give me a sec. Dorothy, we're getting a very cold draft. Can I please ask you to close the two doors on the sides? So I'm starting, my like teeth are starting to, yeah. The draft, yeah, of course. From behind, or what is your preference? Okay.
A breeze from the Robert Sobukwe end.
There we go. Tara.
Oh, I just wanted to, if it's okay, to share this particular passage that Niren, you quote from the Constitutional Court case. Okay, cool. Yeah. Because I think it speaks to what we've been talking about. So it says, just outside Makanda, in an area the British military cleared of the Amaxhosa with what they called, quote, brutal efficiency, unquote, after the Fourth Frontier War, lies a cricket pitch which claims to be the oldest in the country. It is a wicket watered by the blood of removal and the trauma of forced labor, one rolled with frontier nostalgia and contemporary paranoia. How does it play? So this is what Judge Edwin Cameron wrote.
Oh no. So I wrote most of that.
Oh, you wrote that.
There's a quote in there which is from Cameron and the judgment, but from the Salem Party judgment. But sorry.
No, I was like, this is beautiful, really, to Cameron. So this is Niren's beautiful lines. Yeah.
But the quotes are from Cameron. Sorry.
Yeah. So
I'm not as good a writer as Edwin Cameron, though.
Beg to differ, having read both his judgments and your book. But so this quote from Niren speaks beautifully to this violence that you were just talking about.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it sort of comes back to a question of the present, right? And you speak now about how those how in Salem these forms of exclusion mean that they only get this cricketer in the 1980s, and this is an ongoing kind of experience of dispossession, right? And I think that's sort of really important, and one of the things that Niren, you mentioned in the book about the Fitas in the Fitas piece is around something along the lines of like the excruciating point about human potential being denied by a system of legislated racism, right? And I when I read that, it is an excruciating point, right? And it's one that many of us are familiar with. I mean, how many of us know people who will say, well, I could have been X, Y, and Z, but I couldn't because of apartheid, right? And that cuts across so many sectors. But it did kind of drive home the point for me around how forms of exclusion now, and that links to your point both about like continued land dispossession and continued forms of exclusion, but also in terms of sport, right? And how when we look at our national teams and so on, there is this problem of representation, and it still sits there with us, So that's what that kind of drew me back to, is the present moment.
Yeah. Look, I mean, for me also, like, I was speaking to somebody about this in Durban, and we haven't had a TRC, as flawed as the TRC process is. We haven't had one for sport. Sport essentially, much like the question of land, the question of the economy, the question of the arts and culture, sports also suffered this grand betrayal of the black working class by the ANC in the early 90s. And essentially what happened was, as part of this rainbow nationalist project that the ANC seemed very keen on, what happened was that unification became paramount. And what this meant was that with unification became international sports participation. That was the big deal. And what this meant was that the traumas and the violences inflicted on black communities which have been playing sports for over a century was not recognized at all, was silenced, which is similar a little bit to like what happened to the post-TRC process in terms of like the lack of prosecutions, etc., right? But so there was a silencing of the black experience, and so there's a double trauma that is experienced there. One, you have a ceiling placed on your human potential by legislated racism, right? And then secondly, the second violence is when you have your history erased by the incoming government in its attempt to kind of like create this rainbow nationalist project, and not having recognition of what you've suffered, not having any attempt to record it, not having any attempt at reparations. I mean, those are things that we carry with us now, and on some level, you see it in kind of our communities and how we struggle to kind of like reconstitute ourselves sometimes, because of those violences. I think I went off on a tangent. I'm not sure.
That's fine. I mean, I was speaking to a friend about this launch, and one of the things that he spoke about was so we focus a lot on elite professional sports, but there's something about like sociality and social life and the making of social life and community that we maybe don't focus on as much. And I mean, Niren, the book speaks about grassroots sports and that sort of thing. But if we're talking about exclusion, it's not just at the conversation shouldn't just be at the level of are we represented in our national teams, but it should also be at the level of where are public facilities, where's the public spaces, how do we play, where do we play, who do we play with? I mean, I think that's an important part of it. Maybe I'm dragging us too much to the contemporary, but I mean, of course.
No, I agree with you completely. I mean, because part of that sports betrayal in the 90s was that there was no recognition that what we needed was a proper development program in place before you could tell an all-white team you can represent South Africa internationally. There were no demands that were entrenched in development systems, how to create facilities and coaching for communities which have been playing the game for so long. And it comes back to this idea of indigenization. I mean, I think there's something to be said for playing, as Tara was saying, playing on the margins leads to innovation. It leads to kind of like, and we see this in the West Indian team of the 70s and the 80s. We see this in the Sri Lankan team of 1996, which wins the World Cup, playing a completely revolutionary kind of interpretation of the 50-over game. and embracing the mavericks in Sri Lankan cricket, like Murali or like Ranatunga and Sanath Jayasuriya, and completely upending it. And in the margins, sure, we can play on facilities which are not the best, but we also kind of need channels. We need also facilities which are good. We need a combination of that, and again, it needs to be rooted in the hyperlocal, because that is where our sport, our community, our identity, the bonds that keep us together are formed, right? And both on a sporting level, on a political level, and actually on kind of any level, it's about returning to the hyperlocal. And for me, what is interesting is that in all these kind of book launches I've done, actually going to Mr. Sokonile's book launch as well, that is what a lot of, at my book launches, I had a lot of people who were traumatized, who didn't have an opportunity to actually speak about the experience of being silenced, of this experience of like, not only could you have not existed as a sports person, or not only were you not good enough as a sportsman, but you could never have existed as a sports person because you don't have a sporting history. Like all of that was like, people come with these scars, and the thing that stands out is this idea of like community, of what we managed to do in impoverished economic circumstances. We still played sport. We still kind of excelled to the point of it not just being sporting acts, but also political acts. These were acts of resistance against a state that sought to kind of like completely break you down as a human being. And that was not recognized in that betrayal of 1990 onwards. And in some instances, it's still not recognized, because we have kind of xenophobic, Zionist freaks as the Minister of Arts and Culture and Sport, for example. I mean, there's in cabinet, sport and arts and culture is not given the same esteem as other cabinet positions. Why? Because it's seen as some kind of Cinderella posting. But these things help our identity. And I'm trying to drag on, but it is super interesting on several levels, because if you look at what was happening with the cultural workers movements in the 1980s, what you had were, you had poets like Alfred Kabula, who dressed as chicken, addressing mass gatherings of unionized workers of 100,000 in stadiums. You had bus drivers knowing how to play the trumpet. But that entire process dies very quickly between 1990 and 1994 in terms of like us being more than just labor, us being more than just unwaged labor, us being actual human beings. That betrayal is entrenched in that period, and all these things disappear. But we had them in very impoverished circumstances in the 80s, and these were all acts of resistance. Sorry.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think, so one of the things that also really resonates in terms of work that many people have also done around land reform questions and the failure of South Africa's land reform program to properly be able to restore what was actually lost. That even when, say, land is restored, there were other things that were also lost. People's connections to the land, community, a sense of community there, economic potential. There's a whole range of things that were lost, and that kind of resonated in terms of thinking of when people say what they lost in terms of what they could have been in playing cricket, for example. It's not just that they could have played for the South African team. That's a rare instance where someone is good enough to be able to play for a South African team. For the majority of us, for the majority of people who lost something, it was maybe the ability to just keep on enjoying themselves in the game, to be able to play in a way that would build the kind of community and sociality that we're talking about. So all of that was lost, I guess. Then you raise this question in the book, Niren, of like reparations in the context of cricket, and what would that look like? And I wonder, what would that look like to try and restore those possibilities that were lost?
How would you go about it? I would suggest actually, let's not play international sport for 5 years until people get it right.
Niren, we're already suffering. We don't have a test match until
that's a good reason then to not play any more international cricket, right? Anyway, who wants? Our players play more at the IPL than they do for South Africa.
Because I think, linked to this, I was just thinking that it feels like it's still the case in South African cricket that in order to be received by the public as a kind of good cricketer, if you're a black South African cricketer, you still have to be absolutely exceptional. Whereas, as you point out, mediocre white players have played for this country and for various provinces for years and never been criticized the way that someone like Themba Bavuma is criticized, who is actually a brilliant player, and his stats speak to that. And I mean, like, yeah, in a different, but in some ways a glimpse of that, like growing up playing cricket in an all-boys team, I remember for me and other girls, you had to excel to be allowed the possibility of playing. And so the pressure on you to excel as you walked out to bat in that very lonely moment in the middle of the pitch is so intense that it became hard to actually enjoy the game anymore, because the weight of all your gender rests upon you. And kind of, you can't, whereas kids, sometimes you want to be a mediocre player and just enjoy yourself, but that's not an option to you in the context of South African history.
Completely, and it's something that even, I mean, I did an interview with Themba Bavuma like 2 months ago for Business Day column that I do, and I mean, he said exactly the same thing. He said like he wasn't, and Themba comes from, Themba's great-grandfather comes to the Western Cape in the 1920s already knowing how to play cricket. So, so I make the argument that it could only have been someone like Themba Bavuma to be the first black African to score a test century for South Africa, because not only does he have that early indigenization growing up in Langa, but then he moves to Sax and then to St. David's, so he has the privilege of coaching, resources, etc. But on top of that, he also has an intergenerational cricketing DNA, which goes back to maybe possibly even longer than the 1920s, maybe even to the late 1800s, right? And it could only have been someone like him to do that because of these, sorry, I've gone off on a thing now. No, I mean, it could have only been him. But he makes this point in the interview. He's going like, well, he wasn't ready to be the first black African to score that century. And that was in 2016, 2017. He wasn't ready to be the first black African to captain South Africa, because even though he's come through these institutionalized channels, and he's assimilated, because the pressure is on you to assimilate, not for the system to kind of accommodate you. He's assimilated, but he's still not that white boy from Benoni or wherever it is, which makes him a lot easier for him to be accepted. And for your first black African test captain to say that in 2025, I mean, I think suggests I need not say more.
Yeah, I mean, I think both the Hashim Amla and the piece and the Themba Bavuma piece kind of speak to this, right? And it's what Tara's saying. You're carrying the weight of political intersections when you walk out to the middle. And both of them batters, of course, which is significant, right? In terms of that lonely place on the cricket field. But I think both of them kind of speak to that. But this does...
Sometimes sportsmen just want to hit the ball,
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole point.
That's what they do, right? They're not there to talk about marks and like land dispossession. They're there to hit the ball, right?
Yes, we're in a very niche space here. We recognize that.
I mean, I've tried to get them to talk about marks and land dispossession, but bloody hell, it's hard.
So, I mean, this kind of comes to the question of cricket and national identity, and I think. Yeah, I mean, what are your? There's a point in the book, Niren, where you talk about kind of resilience and dignity, and I think this is also, like, those two words kind of stuck in my mind. Resilience and dignity as our. I think it. I don't know if it comes out.
Kind of hackneyed.
In the Hashim piece or the Themba piece, or maybe both. But yeah, I mean, that in terms of like a kind of cricketing identity, because part of the title for this was, race, class, history. Rainbow nationalism and the cricket it plays, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I touched on this earlier in the conversation. It's certainly, we are a very weird, very different country. We all have kind of very different experiences. But we've agreed to be South African. We've agreed to a constitution and these things. So what does it mean to be South African? And for me, it comes back to this indigenization. It comes back to what the West Indies were doing. Because that West Indian team, it was kind of influenced by reggae music, Marcus Garvey, the independence movement in the Caribbean a decade earlier. And it was also influenced by the limitations of the resources they had to play, whether they were playing on the beach or whether they were playing in a very small strip, which didn't, for example, like Amla. Amla is like backcliff which flourishes to gully. That's there because the strip of the backyard that he played on was much smaller. He couldn't do like a straight backcliff, so he had to kind of like he was up against the wall. Lasit Malinga for the Sri Lankan team. I mean, he grew up bowling on beaches and bowling into water. So that's why he's got that slinging action. That's why he had to make the ball skid. So there's an indigenization there, which is both political and technical, which I think kind of represents us a lot more, were it not to be channeled through these white schools, which are institutionalized players, make them think of the world in a very narrow, specific way. Their worldview is essentially kind of formed by extractive capitalism, the extension of colonialism and apartheid, and by Christianity. And I mean, how many of us around this room, in this room, would kind of go like, yeah, those are values that I hold very dear to me? Not very many. And allied to that are the technical aspects, which are very, for me, kind of like echo and I use this specifically, the Anglo-Boer War, not the South African War, because the Anglo-Boer War comes with a very specific mythology around white tragedy specifically. It doesn't recognize black death or black tragedy or suffering during that period, right? And this idea of the Anglo-Boer War is that we were always in the back foot. We were always kind of like, and allied to that is the notion of domkrag, of stupid power, which is what we see amongst kind of like white politics, which we see in like kind of white sports for a long time. And so do these things really represent us? Do they include us? So if we have a team winning and it's a team with like, X amount of black African players, do they really represent us? Do they really represent the townships of Langa and Khayelitsha and Soweto in the 1980s, when politically what we're thinking and expressing was an anti-authoritarian approach to life? It was imagining a different kind of yet to come compared to what was happening in white suburbia. And none of that exists in the cricket that we play now, I don't think. And interestingly, Kumar Sangakkara, the former captain of Sri Lanka, kind of talks about this, how the 1996 World Cup victory, with the players playing very specifically kind of like very anti-orthodox kind of cricket, what it led to was an inclusivity on the island, because prior to that, a lot of the majority of players who played for Sri Lanka came from similarly these private schools or these elite schools. But because of Sri Lanka's success in 1996, playing this maverick version of the game, they were getting all kinds of kind of like people sending in videos of volleyball players who wanted to play cricket, and like the coaches would go, look, this guy can run all day, he can jump high and spike, I'm sure he can bowl. And they got a letter from somebody in like some rural backwater going, I'm a really fast bowler, you need to come watch me play. And they sent like a scout to go, and it turned out to be this Buddhist monk in like saffron robes, 18 years old, going, I want to play for Sri Lanka. And allied to that is a different interpretation of national identity, personal identity, and who we are as a country. And I think that is significant when we think about what is not returned to us as traumatized people when we see the teams which purport to represent us at elite level.
Can I say something additional about that in relation to gender? I think part of that national image is also the masculinity of our men's sports, like the Springboks and the Proteas and Bafana, and the kind of sport that they play. And I mean, it's often hard. It's been such a struggle to get women's sports on the map, not because it's not exciting, but because people hold this idea that, oh, it's not what sport's about. It's not what our country's about. It's not what our nation's about. We're tough, and we're these various things, which it's always a certain image of masculinity that is like linked to what South Africans are, what we're represented as in sport. And yeah, where does like women's sport, how can women's sport challenge that?
I think it is. It completely is. By the way it's existing now, it is. And that is the future for me. It's like women's cricket, women's football. That's where we can see ourselves every day on the sports field more than the men's sport, because it is still about elitism. It's about masculinity. It's about whiteness there, and that white masculine power, which is just fucking, yeah. Sorry. I suddenly had a picture of like security branch cops from the 80s.
That's so we're gonna open up soon. I want to ask Niren a question that I dropped in at the beginning that I said I would sort of ask him, and that's it's about this book, but also there's a section of the book that looks at that where you republish your articles from 1998, 99, and I think you describe them as like kind of a fossil of their from their time, right? And there's other pieces here which then reflect on your kind of approach to slow journalism. So this is not a cricket question, sorry everyone. This is a writing journalism history question.
And just for context, guys, so I joined the Post out of university in 1998 after doing a couple of weird jobs. And so I wrote about cricket for 2 years before spending about 20 years not writing about cricket. And then I started writing about cricket more recently, essentially just to pay for my time to smoke weed and drink beer at the cricket for 5 days.
So Niren, my question is really around how this book kind of intersects with your interest in slow journalism, but also then your work on the two Marikana books, and what kind of draws these things together in your approach to writing histories and doing forms of journalism?
That's a really tough question. You asked me to reflect on my practice and my method. What's similar? What connects this to Marikana? Well, one thing that it doesn't connect to Marikana is that it's complete. So anybody who knows me will know that I've been working on this Marikana project for like 13 years now. I've sent one manuscript to the publishers, but there's another one which is really about documenting. It's a slow journalism process of constantly returning to the families of the men who were killed at Marikana. So it's 44 families that my partner Paul and I work. He's a photographer. We've been working on for the last 12 years.
See how I'm setting us up for our next launch.
But okay. So some of these pieces. Are they slow journalism? They're certainly reflective pieces. And they stand in contrast, I think, to the early work, which are relics of a particular period. And I've included them there for a very specific reason. Because I worked at the Post, which was aimed at an Indian audience. And I was very perplexed in 1998 because I didn't understand why it was still so ethnically biased when, if I looked around at formerly Indian areas, what you had was like across... you had black Africans, and I'm using these terms because, I don't like these terms, but I'm using them specifically now. You had Africans, coloreds, and Indian people living in the same space. And I was wondering why my editor still chose to keep an ethnic slant to our reporting rather than actually kind of extending it towards a class slant, because these communities were experiencing similar challenges, similar dreams, similar kind of approaches to life at a particular point. So those exist as very much as relics. Going forward, I suppose with the Marikana work, the idea really is, and it kind of echoes the photographer David Goldblatt's suggestion that history also happens in the small moments. And so with the Marikana work, the idea is that this massacre happened, but what happens afterwards? And after Marikana is very much about the small moments that these families experience, the surviving mine workers experience. And I think that's kind of like, the layers which reveal themselves through constantly returning to the families, to not just fossilize them in a moment of like mourning and trauma and leave them there as like grieving widows into perpetuity, kind of like trying to add nuance and understanding and maybe layers to to their experience, is something that I try and do with my later cricket writing. It's not just about writing about cricket, it's also writing about all these things which kind of like embedded in us as this weird society which is still trying to figure itself out, you know. And it is about violence, it is about race and identity and class and all these things. Yeah.
Thank you for answering that very loaded question in a very proper way.
Was it okay?
Yeah. So I realized as I was saying it, I was like, maybe this is a bit unfair. We also didn't really discuss this beforehand.
It's fine, dude. It's a short ball from a bowler to another bowler. Thanks. Dude, I just bob and weave, man. That's what I do.
Okay, on that note, before we go too far with the cricket gestures here, I want to open up to all of us who are here for questions, comments, experiences, cricket, politics. Go ahead, Tara.
There we go.
I don't know who's on mic duty from us.
Come on, guys. Have we put everybody to sleep?
Not questions per se. You could also share.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I mean, the one thing I have found, like at a lot of these things, like people need an opportunity to speak about their own violence, the violences that have been like inflicted upon them, you know, and that's also like a really great thing to because you know our histories there have been attempts to erase our history. If there was a question.
I have someone's phone here. Fatima Ismail. I'll keep it with me until someone. Is it yours? I don't know.
Oh, Fatima. Okay.
Okay, and now I'm taking hands. So I have to give you the mic because for our recording.
So quite a lot of the things we've been talking about have been quite intellectual, but I would like to ask both Tara and Niren the craft or the practice of Niren as a writer, and Tara, I'm asking you in your capacity as a cricket player, the practice of doing these things. Can you share some of the insights, the practical insights, maybe not the intellectual insights, but being a writer, playing cricket have taught you? Sorry, very broad, just stepping in because no one's asked a question.
Go for it.
Well, writing is a lot like cricket. It's about repetition, right? You do the same thing over and over again. You wake up in the morning, you like go sit at your desk and you like sit there for 2 hours and you write, right? And which is what you do at the cricket. You go there and you have a session in the morning, but interrupted by a drinks break, and then you have a lunch break. And I kind of really like my day being divided into like, you know, 1 ball, 6 balls, and over, and like kind of like a drinks break, like kind of thing. So cricket and writing for me are like very similar. You should see my calendar. I break it down into like fucking sometimes 30 minutes, like things that I'm doing. But yeah. It's about repetition. I think William Hazlitt, who is one of C.L.R. James's kind of like favorite essayists, he writes very much about the repetition that makes cricketers great. And I suppose you need repetition to also kind of like write, because you only become good at writing by writing over and over again.
Playing cricket. So I fell out of love with cricket when I was about 16 or 17, after that feeling of just the pressure in playing in boys' teams. And it was like in the early 2000s where there also weren't a lot of women's cricket teams around. And I think the chirping, the endless like playing and saying like, oh, ask her for a number, or like the things that boys would say, and then you'd ask the umpire to stop them saying that, and then they'd all be like, oh wow, we were just joking, okay, and then it's like dead silence, which is also not an ideal, like you can't win either way, whether you let it go or you say something. Either way you're like affected by it, especially batting. So anyway, I had a very angry relationship with cricket for about 20 years, and then last year when I moved to Joburg, I started playing again with this very sweet team at Old Ed's Cricket Club, which ranges in age from about 12 to 48 or something. and people coming from all different backgrounds, a lot of gender non-conforming people as well. And now I kind of am falling in love with it again through the making of community in cricket, I think. And it's like going and spending a Saturday afternoon just fielding for like 2 hours, and that's a lot of time to also think about things, which is quite fun, but not to have to think in the way that I do for work. So there's something really lovely about turning on a different part of my brain for cricket, which is almost, I think of cricket almost as like chess in some ways, and that there are so many moving pieces. And that's what I love also about, I think we've talked about test match cricket compared to 2020 cricket. Like there are so many tiny battles within the larger battle that you get to focus on, like what is the pitch doing, and okay, this batter has like changed their stance a little bit, and so now instead of bowling over the wicket, I'm going to move and bowl around the wicket, and maybe I'll bowl them around their legs. So them like setting people up in that way as a bowler and thinking as a fielder about how to...
You're going to bowl around it. Wow, wow, you're good.
I bowl very kind of like, I bowl like off breaks, and that really seems to bamboozle the players who are looking for a quicker delivery. So in my dotage now, I'm bowling off breaks rather than medium pace anymore. But so I think those are some of the things I think about while playing cricket.
I'm not answering this question as the perpetual PhD student, so I'm gonna go for another hand. Yeah. Okay. Here we go.
Thank you. Thanks for that. That was really insightful discussion. I think we know that like professional cricket is quite like white dominated, and Niren mentioned also that even the black players that are there are quite similar because of like the background that you need to get into professional cricket. So I guess my question is, what type of reforms do you think are needed to make professional cricket for both men and women a place that is more inclusive and that can represent modern day South Africa?
Thank you, and congratulations for the publication of the book. I think mine is very simple. I'm really fascinated about how this talk, rather, I won't say a book because I haven't read the book, but the talk actually enables me to really travel in thought, right? Particularly around the issue of gender from a woman's perspective, right? So I'm thinking around how, when I have been exposed to this idea of cricket as a sport that has constantly actually occluded certain individuals from modes of representation, rather, or modes of enculturation, and how you actually bring a different kind of narrative in thinking about this idea of cricket as that which can enable modalities of reparation, right? And this is actually perceived from a very woman's feministic point of view, and how possibly that actually allows not only for a subversion or the confrontation or the challenges that the sport brings about, but also this idea that enables this kind of healing, the joy, the leisure, and many other aspects that we can possibly think about. And also I'm kind of confounded by the very idea of not wanting to maybe cross the thin line or the dichotomy around this idea of assimilation, perceiving or conceiving these women as practically not actually kind of changing a lot of these kinds of perpetual marginalizations that have actually been brought about by the sport. And I'm actually thinking about how it's possible for this kind of representation that we're actually speaking about, particularly around women, actually bringing about this kind of different narrative as easily being assimilated into the very principalities or the ideas of this kind of hegemonic masculinity of the play of the sport. So I think my point exactly is not even about questioning, or rather raising a question, but it's more about how you have enabled me to think about the sport as that which can possibly bring about this kind of reparation, and the sport that can actually enable this kind of modalities where we can forge or carve out alternate spaces to think about other ways of livabilities outside of these structures that have constantly enabled this opportunization of marginalizations of the people who have constantly been precluded, or rather occluded from the greater scheme of things, if we can actually put it that way. So well done in actually just delivering this.
I can respond to the first question, I think. How do we change the game? I suppose it comes back to this idea of, no normal sport in an abnormal society, I suppose, is the Sakos thing that we still kind of like look at. But I mean, are there any normal societies? Probably not, right? I mean, our society isn't a normal one. It's still one kind of like one of grave inequality. Palestine isn't a normal society. The US is not a normal society. I mean, we live in a really abnormal, fucked up world, right? But the conflicts, the catastrophes, the challenges that we face on a political level, I think, are similar to the answers to that. I think can be found. The answers to that also speak to the answers that we can find when we respond to how do we create a more normal sporting space? How do we create a more normal cultural space? And it does come back to community. It does come back to kind of like focusing on the hyper-local, and from there we build. And it's something that has struck me in all these conversations that I've had in the last few months. It's that the need for community to return and to itself, and like how we reconfigure that, I think, is this pressing question that we need to figure out, especially in this moment of late-stage capitalism, of like of climate, environmental crisis, of catastrophe. All these, and we know what got us here. What got us here is white, patriarchal, extractive capitalism. That's what got us here. That's not where we're going to find the answers. And that maybe the answers do come back to the margins which we have to rebuild into the center, because we had those as our centers growing up. In the 1980s, my center wasn't Kingsmead. My center was the Stanger Recreation Ground, which now Jacob Zuma's crony Vivian Reddy has built a shopping mall over. So we can't play sport in Stanger anymore. But what I'm saying is, like, we need to reassert our margins as new centers. And I think from there, we can reimagine politically, we can reimagine sportingly, we can reimagine ourselves. We can also, the other thing that I think is important is that we need to consider now, in this moment, what is the state, what is governance? And neoliberal democracy is not working, it's imploding. And the threat that we face now is authoritarian capitalism, fascism. And how do we respond to that as well? So I think these things are all interlinked. I think we need to figure out new ways of taking back the state, reinterpreting the state's role in our politics, in our economy, in our everyday lives. And in those new reimaginings, we can build maybe closer to a normal society than the ones that we experience today. Yeah. You can take the second question.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it is maybe more of a comment that very like beautifully sums up maybe some of what Niren is also trying to get at in the articles in this book, and what you've also just said now, which is kind of building at the local level and the grassroots level in terms of being intentional about in building up like even girls and women's teams, not being assimilated into that idea of like this kind of quite toxic masculinity that we see in the South African national sports teams, and that's an inheritance of this kind of very British and white settler colonial mentality around the role of sport in like building up individuals in certain ways. And I think it's maybe an interplay between building at the local level, but also continuing to demand something different of our national teams, because as little kids, I as a little kid was watching, the national teams on TV. And so I think that representation and what they do and the politics of the national teams does make a difference. It's not only about the local, it has to be maybe an interplay between the two. And then, hopefully slowly we overthrow that current national team kind of mentality and install something, as you say, that has come from the margins to become the mainstream.
There's something though, I hear where both of you are coming from. And of course, like on the broad politics of it, I get that. But there is something about like governance and administration that I think is like a really boring conversation, but like
Political
one
will.
that if we're gonna get to that question, yes, political will, but also like how do you implement these ideas, from the most basic levels up?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question which the Nicholson Commission responds to. So Judge Chris Nicholson, who you may or may not remember from the Zuma judgment in Pietermaritzburg in 2007, which led to Mbeki being recalled. But he's also the founder of the Aurora Cricket Club, which is a white club which sought to kind of respond to Pete Koronov's very dodgy implementation of racist legislation in the 1970s by creating an all-white team to play, a white team to play, a mixed race team to play in the non-racial sphere, trying to force them to change legislation. So anyway, Nicholson chaired a commission of inquiry into financial malfeasance related to the 2009 IPL, which was held in South Africa. And he makes an important point, and I covered that for the Mail and Guardian at the time. And he makes a very important, and the commission happened in 2011. But he makes a super important point. It's like, Cricket South Africa is a not-for-profit, and its main role, it's the one thing it has to do is develop the sport. But if you compare how much money it's spending on development versus how much money it puts towards the elite teams, there's a huge chasm that exists, and that, I think, is where the mindshift needs to happen within the current paradigm. As it exists now, unless we're going to overthrow CSA and kind of reimagine CSA and reimagine all
And
this
capitalism.
stuff. Yeah, and capitalism and all this shit, because it's all intertwined, it's all interlinked, right? Then it comes down to like, well, we need to hold people accountable for what they're not doing, because you still want to stay in a 5-star, you still want to spend money on your team going, flying first class or whatever and staying in a 5-star. The administrators flying first class and staying in like fancy hotels, while there's no money going to the kids. And your job is actually the children. And I think that's a significant thing that we need to return to. And that's from 2011 and Nicholson.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you guys once again for this beautiful conversation. As I'm sitting here and I'm listening to the conversation, it's a sort of reflection, or rather a thought that comes to me to say, actually, it's really not about race, or rather your identity. It's far much more, as you had said, or as you're explaining, it's an implementation kind of problem to say, who within the right spaces is able to create a safer space, a greater space, or rather a space where everyone is going to flourish, right? That's my own reflection. And now the last question is, are there any developments, or is there any improvements within women's cricket? Are there any changes? And what does the book end? How is the ending of the book? And what does it suggest as a way forward? Because people can speak, we can speak much as we can, but if we're not getting a way forward, or rather we're not trying to bring about enlightenment to a particular issue, then it becomes a problem from us also, the people who are complaining about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think mine is very short to say, what was the role of cricket pre 94, and what is expected of cricket post 94 at the background of discrimination, and if cricket can be a unifying force across South African cultures. Yeah.
If I can respond very quickly to what the book says about, so this is a very slim volume. No, but and one of its shortcomings is actually it doesn't really address women's cricket, because I'm not a cricket journalist, you know. So there are a couple of pieces here from like 1998 which focuses on. And when I was going through the archive, looking at 98, 99, you know, I profiled I think like one or two female players, and I started thinking, where are they now? You know, and I thought like that may be an interesting follow-up to go like, well, you know, where are the players from the 98, 99 period? Because I don't remember them now, you know, making it anywhere. So tracing them. So I mean, I haven't really focused on women's cricket, but I am really inspired to go into that direction because of what they demonstrate, the politics that they demonstrate. And I think, you know, I've reached a point now where I really can't be asked to ask some jock male cricket player about like some depthful like, you know, about his identity and stuff, and he's not going to give me an answer in the same way that a queer female cricket player or, you know, non-binary cricket player may provide, you know, kind of a more complex answer. So that's one. In terms of where's cricket before, now, and can it unify us? I don't believe in this rainbow nationalist project of kind of like nation building through sport. I think we all get a dopamine hit when our teams win, and like for 5 seconds we're like, yay, whatever, right? But the bottom line is the inequality in our society remains the same. The racism we experience is still the same. The violences we experience are still the same. The privilege that some people have remains. There's certain things that have not changed in our society. And winning a World Cup is not going to change that for me. But if I see transformation happening at grassroots level, that I see as change. And I think, I mean, that for me is interesting. And if I look at cricket pre-1994 in black communities, I think there was an imaginary there's a vision there, which got completely suppressed in that unification period from 1990 onwards, and which we now see the residual of now. And I think we need to kind of go back to all of those things, that self-sufficiency, the fire, this really strong anti-authoritarian kind of like sensibility that we had when we were burning the streets, when we were making this country ungovernable. And I'd like to see that in our cricket, because that ungovernability can suggest a different way of playing, which I can relate to. I'm not going to relate to a bro who has come through a system and he talks about Jesus Christ and his drip, and like that's I'm not going to get that.
So Niren, you mean to tell me that when Bavuma wins the final, you're only going to get a small dopamine hit?
Look, I'll get probably a reasonable dopamine hit from that and the tequilas I'll be drinking afterwards. Sure. How will I feel? I mean, I think I would feel compromised. You know, I only started kind of supporting South Africa in its cricket around like 2011, 2012. Until that point, I'd boycotted going to the stadium. Historically, my mum still supports anyone but South Africa when it comes to like rugby and cricket, you know. And we come from that kind of like community. But part of me, it's this weird contradiction, right? That is cricket. Part of me is going to celebrate because Temba Bavuma, the first black African test captain of South Africa, is going to lift that mace. He's the 7th best batsman in the world, and I will feel pride for that. But there's other aspects where I will feel like these guys don't know me, they will never know me, and they don't represent me as well.
Sure. I mean, Tara and I will also get to the two questions. I just think there's something really interesting in what you're saying, because every time there's a huge international sporting event, I always have to resist being the Grinch, right? Like, it's so tough because I want to be happy and in the streets and, you know, like just, but there's always this conversation in your head, right? So I reckon a lot of us here will have a kind of similar experience. But it is like there has, and the response to that, like anyone but South Africa thing is, well, there has been progress, there's been transformation, like things have changed. And I think what you're saying about when you see the development at a grassroots level, when you see that it's part of our public life, that's when maybe we can stop being perpetual Grinches with like unease about all of these events.
Every now and again I do drink the Kool-Aid, like when the Springboks came out with those little videos, and like I'm listening to Rassie Erasmus talk about Mampimpi and how he didn't have any photographs of family to put in his thing, and I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna cry now. It's like, oh, like moving. I mean, I do drink the Kool-Aid every now and again, but I very quickly find the tequila bottle and I'm okay.
I too drank the rugby Kool-Aid, and I think almost to the point where a lot of us who are cricket fans are kind of jealous a little bit,
But have and there's a question that's been put to me, and I don't really I'm not sure if I'm answering it properly because I don't think I know enough about rugby. But has rugby indigenized the way they play? I mean, it feels a little bit more. They still do like the power forwards and stuff, but there's some flair, I think, in the back. I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to figure out. I mean, have they indigenized the game more than?
There's someone in the audience who I might force the mic on to answer that question, who's a rugby person. He knows who he is. But I mean, that is but in the way it's presented. Sorry, Tara, we're leaving you out of this a little bit. And in the way it's presented. At least in the kind of narrative of the 2 Rugby World Cups, right? And there's these documentaries, Chasing the Sun, that become really narratives about that, and they set this, they set it down, right?
They're completely manipulative.
Yeah. I mean, they're pieces of propaganda, right? But I think in that you kind of see this tension between like South African rugby and world rugby, where this idea of a South African brand of rugby kind of comes out. And it comes back to what you write about, Niren, about this question of resilience, that I think that is very much at the heart of the rainbow nationalist, not in unproblematic ways, right? But that rainbow nationalist concept that drives national teams and particularly drives that narrative of stronger together in the kind of Springbok thing, right? I think there's something there that...
Yeah, but it's also something there which helps deflect attention from our political failures and glosses over those political failures to go like, we're a resilient nation, so you can carry on suffering because you don't have proper sewage, you don't have electricity, you live in a shack, but you're resilient. And I find that kind of difficult to grapple with sometimes.
But there is also a question of why that's powerful at a public level, right? Anyways, let's set that aside for just a minute. Tara?
On the question of, and maybe you can also speak to this, Taz, and maybe others like Mariska, if you'd like to offer something in your experience in women's cricket playing and also, administrative side and trying to build it and so on. But I think obviously there's been a huge amount of progress since when we were kids kind of thing, growing up in like the 90s and early 2000s, trying to play cricket and trying to imagine a future. Because I can definitely, we were having this conversation the other day, but I can pinpoint like the years in which I stopped imagining a future in cricket because I was, not to toot my own horn, but when I was 12, I was playing under 19 Western Province, and I thought that there was a future there for me.
You should toot your own horn, yeah.
But by the time I was like 15 or 16, I was like, I don't want to play a game. There's no future here because there's not enough money in it to be professional, and there's not respect in it, and it'll just never be like I once imagined playing in like a gender neutral cricket team for South Africa, in which there are people like across the gender spectrum representing South Africa. And when that wasn't a possibility, when that hit home, I was like, no, I opt out. So I think there's been huge progress in terms of the women's game in South Africa, and that there is more funding there. Again, though, I don't know at the grassroots level to what extent are the little kids playing who can continue to imagine that future and who get like equal support to what some of the boys' clubs or schools get.
So I think on the question of the women's game, and there are people in the audience who I hope will also speak to this, as players of cricket, of women's cricket. I think what Tara's saying completely hits the point. I mean, firstly, just to caveat that, of course, like, we haven't done enough work on grassroots development cricket to be able to say, but looking as followers of cricket, as fans of cricket, looking at the women's game, I think the change has been pretty profound, actually, to watch over the last few years. I mean, you have the Women's World Cup that was hosted here in Cape Town, and the stadiums are packed out, and it's just like, it almost just gives me goosebumps, because it's really it's something that we could not have imagined, right? I also played cricket as a child, played with the boys, as the common saying goes, and I think I think credit to my brother, my older brother, largely because of him. I didn't think of myself for a long time as a girl playing cricket, because he allowed me to just be a cricket player, or kid who likes playing cricket with him and with others. But there is that point that you get to, definitely, where there's no pathway, right? So for me, there's no next step. There's no girls teams. The boys are all progressing at a different level, not a better level, but they're going in different directions. And I think we joked about this, that there comes a point where you just say, well, it's time to go play hockey, and that's sort of what I did. So I think as a child who absolutely loved cricket, I mean, I always say cricket is my first love. You sort of see now how far that has come, where there's now a domestic, a league. There's a way to make a life out of cricket for people who are talented and put in the hard work of it. And I think that's been really wonderful to see. And hopefully we can get a lot more matches and test matches that we can all go and watch. And so, that cliche of the little kid seeing themselves is, a thing. Because this big kid sees herself, and it's a cool thing.
Does anyone else want to start?
Thanks, Tara, for this invite. I think it has opened my mind. And I think you all have spun my mind and bowled me over. So please join our team.
You don't want me in your team. I'm so bad.
We'll put you on the boundary.
Outside, serving drinks, yeah.
Definitely. So I'm going to go from back to front. I'm going to chat to the two ladies and about a little bit about women's cricket. I agree with Tara. Women's cricket has evolved. A little bit of history about me. I started watching Kapil Dev play. And a little bit of history about me. If I was a boy, my dad and mom wanted to name me Kapil Dev. So, yes. So, I turned out to be a girl, and I play cricket still. So, yes. There is funding, but not much. That's one. Two, it is still a male-dominated sport, where I've been on, executive teams, and it's been difficult. Where we've known you don't know much, we'll handle it. So there is a long walk up a big hill for women's sport, women's cricket in particular. But I think at grassroots levels, so KFC money cricket, clubs establishing women's teams from 12 years to 48 years, it gives that inspiration and motivation. Just something for those that don't know. There is for the first time, a veterans women's league that for 40 plus that I'm involved in as well. So this is a call out to anyone in the audience. If you don't know, or if you know, come chat to me afterwards, and we'll bowl you over as well. So yes, women's sport or cricket has evolved, but there's still a long way. I'm part of the team at Old Eds, and I manage it with Tara. And it's an amazing sport. It's camaraderie sport. sportsmanship, discipline, making sure you know, respecting the umpire as well. You know, coming to Niren's book and tying this up, there's a huge link. Just a question to you. Writing this book, and I can hear, you know, you've got passion. What's the highlight? What stood out for you? What made you grow another pace, another level? What bowled you over when you sat there and you're like, oh, okay, that's a question. And I think coming back, there's so many pillars through your talk. Sport humbles you. That's one. Two, it unifies a nation. When we watch any sport, it brings the nation together. What color, race, creed, you want to wear the South African flag with pride. Although my mother, Niren, does not support South Africa, so I attest to that, especially if India and South Africa are playing, because I have strong roots in India. So, yes, I understand. And I think it brings us together as a nation. If I had to gel colonization and cricket, when you walk on as a player, you're there to face and you're in battle. Just like exactly how we fought the war as slaves, as we fought those wars through the decades and centuries. But I think it comes back to being a gentle war, because back when England started playing cricket, it was a gentleman's game. And it plays on, you walk on, but it's a soft tone of war. We rage war when we play. And you can ask Tara.
I think it was Oscar Wilde who called it war minus the shooting, right?
Yes, correct. I mean, your ball is your bullet, and your bat is your defense. So, if you take it back to capitalization, colonization, war, there's a direct link, but in a different direction. And yet we don't view that. We look at the fun and the excitement and play of the match, and he scored a century. But if you look back, it's war, you know. And if you go back, if you link it with women's cricket, you know, we used to wear skirts years ago, back in the centuries. And looking from a woman's point of view, the attire, you know, because it was a male-dominated sport, the attire wasn't looked at. Nowadays, you know, we have women's cut shirts and women's cut pants, and, you know, which, yes, we evolved. You know, we haven't figured out the ball guard as yet, but we'll get there. I think my experience is, just to end it off, I think at Old Ed's women's cricket team, I think the women make the team. And for lack of better words right now, it escapes me, the team we've created is you come as you are. If you want to feel you are queer, we accept you. And I think the team we've created, it's non-judgmental. It's black, Indian, white, colored, multiracial, multisexual. Because that's what you want. In sport, you don't want to be judged. You go out there because people come there to de-stress. They come there for competition. They come there to be proud. They come there to make their families proud of them. Because when you carry any emblem, club, school, national, you're going out there to carry that family flag, that family surname, like Bavuma, like Keshav Maharaj. You carry your surname, you carry your religion, you carry the hopes of your family. On a club level, you carry the club's name, the chairman's name. You carry your team's aspirations. And I think you carry if you play for the province or the country, you carry that flag. Is it Lions, Titans, Gauteng, Western Province? And at a national level, you carry that Protea. So I think there's a lot of stress when you walk onto that field, because you walk on as a captain, as a player, with the hopes and dreams of a youngster, a girl that's playing rural cricket, or a woman or a girl that's playing in an affluent school. And if you come to the one pillar, land. I went to a government school. I had to find a school that had women's cricket. But then if it was an affluent school, they had the cricket pitch, women's cricket, girls' cricket. Land was devoted. It was a money. You could pay for that. In the government areas, in the rural areas, there's no money. So it's still that bartering of, okay, we have the money, we can build a cricket field. And you pay for that. So I think there's a lot of you touched, and it's inspired me. I just want to buy your book now.
So I was just about to say, Niren has 5 copies that he'll accept EFT for. For anyone else who wants to buy the book, I should have said this at the beginning, I am terrible. Kim will take down your details, and Kim over there from Swap, and we can get you a copy of the book. So that's, yeah, you can get one. And right, guys, let's wrap it up. Final comments.
You asked about the highlight of writing this book. So, I mean, this book is actually a collection of essays that I've written over time, plus journalism, right? So it came out between conceiving it very drunkenly in Joburg and getting it out at the Durban International Book Fair on December 1st last year. It was 6 weeks. I essentially did it just to kind of dislodge my writer's block around Marikana, to prove that I could do something. So the highlight, and because it's happened over several years, the highlight for me, I think, in thinking about cricket and writing about it, is trying to reflect on South Africa. That's been like an interesting thing for me, where we are now, and what are these paradoxes and contradictions that we kind of embrace, kind of refute, etc. But that was in the writing process. But certainly, what has been a major highlight for me is going on this tour for the last 6 months. I think that's been super inspirational for me, because in Durban at Ike's, my class 1 school teacher rocked up. I hadn't seen her in like 30 years or something. I was like, what? So like from that, but also to kind of like to people who, who were traumatized by the histories, coming and kind of somehow contributing to a discussion and feeling a little bit healed by the end of it. I think that was really exciting for me. Commitment by people that, you know what, or this idea that the sense of community that we need to return to is how we can respond to this moment. I think that was also a really invigorating kind of thing on a political level, intellectual level, and all these other levels. So those have been kind of highlights for me, I think. To what you spoke to about, I think it kind of ties up with all the stuff around the pressures that black players face compared to white players, the essence of cricket and stuff. There's an excerpt here from C.L.R. James's essay, What is Art?, which I can read if you have time, or we can kind of just like end it. It's this little thing here, which kind of starts, which is the beginning of the Hashim Amla essay, which I'm kind of proud of. And it was it took me 3 years to write, much to the exasperation of my editor at the Cricket Monthly. But it was actually published on the day that C.L.R. James was born. So I felt like my taking so long was worth it. No, but it is interesting. It's from the essay, What is Art, right? The batsman facing the ball does not merely represent his side. For that moment, to all intents and purposes, he is his side. The fundamental relation between the one and the many, individual and social, individual and universal, leader and followers, representative and ranks, the part and the whole, is structurally imposed on the players of cricket. So I think that's an interesting kind of thing to think about, both in terms of like collectivism, politics, horizontalism, down to like cricket and what black players face every day when they go out to the centre to play, to bat or bowl.
On that note, I think we'll wrap it up there so that we can, those of us going to watch the footy, will make it in time. But a huge thank you, Niren, for allowing us to have this conversation, Tara for coming in and bringing your really valuable insights and a different way of reading cricket and this book. And a huge thanks to the SWAP team, Simon, Kim, Dineo, who are here, and Lucinda.
Huge thank you, Kim, Dineo, Simon, everybody.
And
Taz,
everyone for
Lucinda
coming
who's
out
not here.
on this
Taz
very
holding
cold
it all
night.
together.
Yeah, trying, but like freezing over here. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yay.
Thanks for coming.